The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world and probably somewhere up behind the moon or something. You know, that one planet that never tells us where they're at. So with that, I want to welcome everybody tonight. We got with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
And we got Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And we got another great show lined up for tonight, and we hope everybody enjoys it. So I think what we'll do is, because we got a whole lot to talk about, we're just going to let Jeff introduce our guest.
Yeah, well, tonight we have returning guest Preston Dennett, a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. And Preston is a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 26 books and more than 100 articles about UFOs and the paranormal. Preston began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having traumatic, unexplained encounters. And since then, he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. So welcome back, Preston Dennett.
Hey, thanks for having me.
In nearby Reseda.
Now, we're going to be talking about your new book tonight, UFOs at the Drive-In. And I guess they started recording things back in, I guess, mid-50s. Or, I think it was, 52, something like that. And, but it keeps going right on up to now. I would assume that probably there are fewer reports, though, because I believe that there's been a lot of drive-ins that closed. It's not, I guess people don't go to them like they used to.
Oh, they're open out here.
Yeah, the real heyday was the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah.
And by the 80s, they really started to die out very fast.
Oh, you have your camera on, Preston? You can turn that off.
Oh, I do?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. There we go.
Got it.
Not that we don't mind looking at you, but
all right. I know I was looking at the map that you have in the book showing where the different locations has been. And it doesn't look like that there was any sightings in the states of Oregon, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Iowa, Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, and North Dakota. Although I would have thought that there would have been some in North Dakota. The reason I say is I spent 4 years there in the Air Force from 66 to 70. And I know that we did have times when we were sending jets up because of sightings. And of course, I can't talk about those, but I know that had taken place because we also had missile bases. And from my understanding, there would be UFOs around the missile bases a lot. So, why do you think that a lot of those states didn't actually have any sightings?
I'm guessing they did, but they just didn't get recorded.
Okay.
Because that's my only logical guess. Because honestly, most states have. The vast majority do.
Right.
So I'm thinking a few slipped by, and probably the vast majority of cases like these drive-in theater encounters have gone unrecorded.
And possibly those who may have seen it didn't want to report it, like people think I'm crazy or something?
Yep, I think that's probably one of the factors. I know that some people did try to report it, and the police are like, sorry, we're not interested, and neither was the news. And airport denies any involvement, or Air Force. So some people hit dead ends. Others were able to get their reports out. In fact, I've collected about 100 of these cases. So there's a lot of them, and it wasn't from books. I can tell you that. There was only a couple. I found most of these in newspaper articles, old newspapers from 50s and 60s and 70s, and also, UFO databases from MUFON, perhaps, and National UFO Reporting Center, APRO, and others. But most of these cases people haven't heard about. I'm pretty confident.
No, I haven't heard any of these reports that you have in this book, which is...
Now, can we step back a little bit here? Because to me, it's fascinating that there, of course, we started the space race in the 60s, and that everybody was kind of space happy to begin with. And I mean that in a good way. There was a lot of enthusiasm towards sending a man to the moon. And NASA had this really big push, and everybody wanted to be an astronaut. So, I mean, how does that psychological wave hit potential sightings, and were those recorded? I mean, did anybody go back to look at the period of time in which there was larger amounts of documented UFO sightings?
Yeah, there were definitely what we would call waves or flaps of activity, where it just goes crazy.
I haven't heard that term in a long time.
But it's a definite pattern we see, and it really began what was in 1947. We had this huge super wave that swept across the U.S., across the world, really, and there's never been anything like it, really, in modern history. This began the modern age of UFOs. And so that was a huge year. Another huge year was 1952. For whatever reason, it was just super active. And we're not exactly sure why. People have tried to pin this on perhaps the close approach of Mars. That was before we went to the moon or had really explored our solar system. So there was a lot of speculation about where these guys were from. We were pretty sure they're from outer space from the beginning, I think. At least the military was, if you look at the documents. But it's hard to say. 1965 was another big year. 73 comes every now and then. These just gigantic waves of activity.
And the way it seemed, the way that I guess they were reported, it's like it was like they was coming to watch whatever was playing on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, I looked into that. So here we have, these are not normal sightings.
Right.
Your average sighting is kind of, an object just flies by at night.
Right.
Maybe it zigzags, hovers for a second, and off it goes. And there's a number of cases where people were at drive-in theaters and had that type of sighting. But that's not what I'm talking about in this book. These are crazy sightings. These are, what makes them different is a number of really important factors. One is that they come down to a very low level, the level of the screen, often right above the screen, literally right above the movie screen, or right to the right of it, right to the left of it, but within 50 feet of ground level. That's crazy. Second, they stay there for a long time in some of these cases. It's not just a quick flyby. They're hanging out for 5, 10, 15 minutes, more than that in some cases, a half hour, an hour, sometimes the full length of the movie. Wow. And not only that, and this is wild, these objects will put on a display. They will do some sort of movement or some sort of activity that's clearly meant to get attention. And we can get into that a little bit, but another real important fact is that these are very widely viewed sightings. Your average movie theater encounter has 100 witnesses. 200 probably would be more accurate, but a lot more in some cases. 300, 400, 500, 1,000, 3,000. A lot of people are seeing these things, and there's no other cases like this in the UFO literature. There's a few over concerts, a few over sports events, but not nearly the number we have here with these captive audiences. And I don't think it's the movie. I really don't. I looked into it because we have The Simpsons, we have Exorcist, Jurassic Park, King Kong, Tom Jones, James Bond. There's just this huge variety. And they're not, in most cases, they don't stay for the whole movie. I think they're got a very specific reason for doing this.
Has there ever been a report of an abduction while this was going on here?
There could be. There are some really weird factors that point towards this. In like one case, I interviewed a lady personally. She worked with me, found out I was a UFO researcher. This was my first driving case at a theater. And she described how as a little girl, she went with her family to the drive-in theater, Paramount Drive-In, 1972. This is in California. It's a big theater, and suddenly she hears people screaming. She looks out her window. People are dropping their popcorn, their drinks. They're screeching out of the theater. She looks at her parents. They're totally hypnotized. She looks outside the window and sees this giant classic flying saucer right next to the screen, to the right of it, below the actual level of the screen. It's huge. It's not totally silent, but making a soft whooshing noise, she said. And had little colored lights and was just kind of watching them watch the movie. And here's where it gets weird. She doesn't remember what happened. She doesn't remember really leaving or it leaving. In fact, they forgot about the whole darn thing and didn't talk about it. It wasn't until years later they heard someone on the radio talking about UFOs, and he starts to say how he was at the Paramount Drive-In in 1972 and starts describing their sighting. And they realized, oh my gosh, we were there. That was us. And Claudia, the main witness, she turns to her mom and says, Mom, do you remember that? And her mom's like, yeah. And Claudia says, why didn't we talk about it? What happened? And her mother's like, I have no idea. I don't know why. Just never thought about it, which is makes me wonder, could there have been missing time? Because there are some very hairy cases like that. Oh, I've got another one of them, if I could tell you.
Sure.
Yeah, this case is crazy. I talked to the witness again firsthand. His name is Scott Santa, and he was at the Ascot Park Drive-In in Cuyahoga Falls. This is, August 1974. And it's a crowded theater. Everyone's just watching the movie. He doesn't remember the movie. But suddenly, this giant kind of boomerang, triangle-shaped object comes very low, right over the screen, like they always do. And as soon as it hits the level of the screen, the movie blacks out. And the entire theater goes dark. All the lights go out. And people jump out of their car. They're looking up. People are just staring in awe, entranced. They can't believe it. No real panic. And this thing just moves slowly overhead. You can hear a low thrumming noise. His ears pop. It was a very weird feeling, he said. And it just finally moves off. And it was about 3 times the size of the theater, he's guessing. Wow. So we're talking
big.
Right. Yeah, massive.
Coming over Devil's Tower size.
Right. And so this thing just moves off, and here's where it's weird. It just makes me wonder what the heck happened. As soon as it leaves the vicinities, it's really still in view, but it's moving off now. It's no longer over the theater. At that moment, all the lights come back on. The movie starts. It just goes, all powers up, like you flip a switch. And how do people react? They forget the UFO. Everyone just gets back into their car and starts watching the movie.
Yeah, that's what we paid for.
Well, If I can ask a question here, which is the blinking lights, etc. Is it possible that those are some sort of hypnotic triggers?
I think so. I think that's one of the reasons UFOs have very amazing lights. And I thought initially they're for maybe navigation or sensing devices or who knows. But after hearing a million people tell me, oh, it was lit up like a Christmas tree. It was beautiful. It had red and yellow and purple and green. I'm like, well, why is it so beautiful? And people keep saying I couldn't look away. I was entranced. I was hypnotized by those lights. I'm like, there it is. Someone said that, and I'm like, that's the reason. These lights are flashing at people.
So they found some sort of synchronization which could perhaps induce a hypnotic.
Blinking lights have been known to certainly trigger epileptic seizures, so it could easily, mess with, people just sort of like staring and like, oh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it works. Let me tell you, it works. In this case where I just tell you, with Scott Santa, after this object moved out, he forgot everything. Everyone forgot it, all of it. It was 3 years later. He was in a bookstore, saw a book about UFOs, and boom, that was a good enough cue for this experience to flood back into his brain. So that's what we call a cue. Anything that reminds you of the original incident can bring back these memories, just like any kind of recovered memory, whether you're child abuse or whatever.
I can't remember the details, but I remember there was one abduction of a family, and they came back and they realized, they were disoriented because they felt like, oh my goodness, we missed time or something. And their daughter says, well, they didn't make me forget. And she was able to relate to them what happened.
Yeah, they let the little kids remember often. And the little kids come away like, we saw a spaceman. Everyone kind of gives them the strange look.
Pat them on the head. La, 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 la.
Well, what a better way to condition children to be accepting as an adult is if they don't forget.
Yeah. So I think that's really the reason they're showing themselves off as theaters, is to kind of convince people of their existence. I don't understand why else they would put on these shows. And
they really like that. They really like that. Let's go out to the lobby tune. So,
at first I thought, what the heck is going on here? Because I'm going through all these reports, and then I got this report from George Fawcett, a really well-known researcher. This occurred at the Wellington Circle Twin in Medford, Massachusetts, May 1963. 2 glowing discs showed up. And seconds later, 2 more showed up and slipped right under the first 2. So now we have 4, and the first 2 scooted up, and then 2 more come. So now we have 6 in 2 columns. And moments later, there's another 2. We now have 8 discs, a whole fleet, in 2 separate columns, and they're hovering there for just a few minutes and suddenly start to put on the show. All for the next 45 minutes.
Wow.
They started playing musical chairs, rotating in these 2 separate columns and darting around and doing all this stuff. Finally lined back up again and took off.
Huh.
So that was like, all right, they know they're being observed.
now you're just showing off.
Yes.
Now, why do you think that somebody watching this didn't call the authorities and report it? Because it doesn't seem like any military ever come to investigate. And you would think that maybe they would should have picked it up on radar.
Oh, yeah, the military knows. There's a few cases where they've chased it off, and they're very interested in these cases from the very beginning. Let me tell you this case. It's crazy. August 12th, 1952, terrorist drive-in in Bakersfield, California. An Army officer, Lieutenant Jenkins, decides to go to the drive-in movie theater with terrorist drive-in, and is there with a bunch of other people. I mean, there's space for over 600 cars at this theater. And sometime during the middle of the movie, this, without any warning, a sort of cigar-shaped object, dirigible-shaped, drops down out of the sky and hovers directly over the screen, like they always do. think it was like 50 feet up, 10 feet up, really low, and wasn't visible until it was right there over the screen. It flashed on yellow lights, or maybe they were portholes, some people thought, and just stays there for a few moments in this case and takes off. The early cases aren't nearly as exciting as the later ones, but this one was a rare early case that was just crazy. So this object darts off like a bullet. Lieutenant Jenkins calls the local police station. It's Deputy Leroy Hatfield, takes his report, hangs up the phone, and the phone rings again. It's another person from the terrorist drive-in. And after the fourth call, he hangs up the phone and says, wait, I'm coming over. Goes to the drive-in. There's 100 people there. And he interviews about 20 or 30 of them and gets a real good idea of what they saw, writes up a report, and forwards it to the Air Force. It's routed to Edwards Air Force Base Project Blue Book, which is just starting out. And Project Blue Book actually forwards it to the Air Technical Intelligence Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The ATIC is the one that handles the UFO reports of the highest national security. And this report was marked action, sent the very next day, and didn't stop at the ATIC. It was also simultaneously sent to Ent Air Force Base in Colorado, where we track all air traffic, and to the top of government, Director of Intelligence at Washington, D.C. So we knew from the beginning. A 1950 case also sent to Colonel John Meade, the commanding general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. A number of these cases have gone through Blue Book. Not one made it to their, quote, official unexplained list. It's kind of ludicrous.
Huh.
But yeah, our government is well aware of this and has chased them off in a few cases as well.
Now,
So like the modern ones, if they have a sighting, do the people reporting it actually report back that they see military aircraft afterwards?
Only in a few cases, like there was this one where, gosh, I'm not sure which case this was. I can find it though, where this object was hovering over the theater for a long time, and finally, oh yeah, I remember this. Belleville, Illinois, October 1975. They were watching Last Tango in Paris, and two objects were darting around, and the projectionist finally just turned off the movie because no one was watching it. 100 people got out of their cars and were watching these objects dart around over the theater, putting on a show, and finally these military jets appeared and chased them off. So that does happen.
They're really strict about not paying to get into a drive-in.
Right? I think it might be teenagers doing it, honestly, because I'm joyriding around, behaving in this way that's pretty contrary to how UFOs usually behave.
Well, that was a satirical posit in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that teenagers would buzz lower civilized planets just to like freak them out.
wow.
Yeah, but look at UFO behavior. They're chasing cars down the road. How many cases do we have of that? 1,000. Where
Really?
they scare living daylight. They just chase cars down the road.
Huh.
It's the weirdest thing. And now they're hovering over theaters and putting on shows. It's just crazy. I mean, here's another one here's another case, if I could real briefly, just because it typifies this kind of case. It's occurred at Mentor, Ohio. This is mid-1960s. And this cigar-shaped object comes down and is hovering over the theater for about a half an hour. They turned off the movie again in this case. And it was like right next to the parking lot there, not over the screen in this case. So they turn off the movie, and at this point, this is when the object puts on the show. It's as if they know we're there to be entertained. I don't know.
It's our cue.
And so this show begins. The cigar-shaped craft suddenly turns vertical and releases 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 discs, one after another, which all start darting around, doing on this show, hovering, pulling U-turns, disappearing, reappearing, turning at right angles. And finally, after several minutes, they all lined up in a row like good little school children and went one by one back into the cigar-shaped craft, the mothership. And this cigar-shaped craft resumes a horizontal position and darts off. You can't tell me that's not a show.
Wow.
That's cool. Well, maybe they're really car aficionados, that they're following cars, but there's a lot of gathering of technology. Even in a drive-in, there's a lot of cars. If they're following a car, and I know that they also follow aircraft and perhaps ships at sea too, is it that they're more interested in our transportation technology than they are the fact that there's a mass of humans there? Because they're not, well, I guess they do sort of go over stadiums as well, but not to the extent that they are with a lot of technology around.
Yeah, you're not the first person to bring this up, and I hadn't really considered it, because there does seem to be something like or if they're chasing cars down the road and lifting them up, and sometimes, and their vehicles are also very fascinating. So maybe that's part of the draw. These are giant screens with huge beams of light and this very distinct triangular sort of footprint that can be seen probably quite easily from outer space. Mm-hmm. And so could be a simple curiosity, but ultimately, no, I've rejected all these theories. I don't think it's the movie. I don't think it's the cars. I don't think people are entranced, and that's what's causing it. I don't think they're there to study the movie. I think they're there to put on a show, and I think I know why. I was really thinking about this, because they keep doing these weird displays. And I think the reason is not only, definitely to convince people of their presence, but the question would be, why do they care? Why do they want us so bad to know about them? I think there is an agenda, honestly, of open official contact. At some point, I think that's what they want to do. So they're getting us used to their presence in a way that's not going to upset society in such a way that it's going to cause panic. Though I have to tell you, in some of these cases, there is a complete panic. Oh, wow.
Wow.
So let me ask you then, where do you think first contact is going to happen? Is it going to happen in a vast crowd like this, or is it going to be the UFOs landing at the White House lawn?
Well, they did try the White House in 1952, and the reaction wasn't good. That was many years ago, some 70 years ago, so maybe things would be different now. Maybe not. I don't know if they're going to pull I don't know if they're going to pull a White House maneuver again. What we have seen is them hovering over city centers in a few cases, like Phoenix or Mexico City. Generally, they pick a sort of rural area outside a large population base. So we had the Topanga Canyon UFO wave right outside of LA. We had the Hudson Valley wave right outside of New York. Gulf Breeze. Withville, Virginia was a tiny little town which had a massive wave. I think they'll probably pick a little town like Stevensville, Texas. Remember that? That had a wave of sightings.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's their general pattern. But I don't know. It could be New York City. It could be LA. It could be Paris. I think that's what's going to happen, though. They're going to show up, and they're not going to run away from our jets. And I don't think we're going to shoot at them either. We stopped doing that after losing a lot of aircraft and pilots. So we'll see how this goes down. But I do expect at some point there will be an event like that, very much like Phoenix Lights testing the waters.
So, at the risk of sounding like ancient aliens here, the monuments, the pyramids, for example, which are based roughly on the star cluster of the Pleiades. There's Mayan pyramids, there's pyramids in Thailand, etc. There's the Nazca lines, which supposedly are there to act as a roadmap. Do you think that modern cities are the new equivalent of those roadmaps?
No, I'm not sure that I would characterize it that way, because what we do see is they are mapping our society. They're hovering over our Air Force bases, our nuclear power stations, our nuclear missile sites, all missile sites, dams, any installation draws them in. Jim and Coral Lorenzen, the pioneers of UFO research, noticed this early on and were able to predict a number of sightings. Whenever there'd be like a new factory opening, they're like, oh, something's going to happen. So we see them hovering over smokestacks, factories of all kinds. So it appears that they are mapping our technology, certainly. And they're certainly, I think, watching our progress into space, because they're following our rocket launches very closely. I wrote about that. Lots of rocket launches with UFO sightings. So I don't know. It's hard to say. There are certain things that are UFO attractors, and drive-in theaters is one of them. Schoolyards. They love showing themselves off to kids, usually elementary age. But all kinds of things. Cemeteries, prisons, all kinds of sightings are over prisons. It's, anything technological really draws them in.
Okay. So it's more technology draw, I guess, in back in 5,000 BC.
Barbara, you're breaking up. Try again.
Let me see if I can.
It's a switch.
Yeah, usually it's Jeff. Aliens. So in the old days, it would have been the pyramids would have been the technological wonder of the time. And so you're right, these displays of technology and the drive-in theater would have been most obvious because it has the flashing lights just the way they have, right?
Yeah, huge beams of light. They're all about beams of light, aren't they? And
yeah.
Computer screens, these giant screens. There's a couple of cases where they're actually, shining their beams of light on the screen itself.
Really?
Which is really fascinating. Yeah, most of these I think you'd classify as a simple sighting, a CE1. But in a good percentage of cases, the speakers will suddenly become all staticky, or the screen becomes distorted, or the movie actually goes out, or the power goes out. Those are CE2s, close encounters of the second kind, that are affecting the environment. Some of these could be CE3s, abductions. We don't know for sure, but here's where here's the way I look at it. There's a close encounter of the fifth kind, a human-initiated encounter. I think every single one of these could be classified as a close encounter of the fifth kind, because we essentially are causing them. We're provoking these UFOs into an appearance, drawing them in with these drive-in movies.
Remind me what the fourth is? I remember three.
I guess.
Fourth is actual contact, is it not?
Yeah.
Three. That's third.
No, I mean interaction. Sorry.
Yeah,
Oh.
fourth is being taken on board.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
I don't know. The
Abduction.
Hynek system has not fully been embraced. It was for a while. Now we're trying to move away from we're trying to move away from the term UFO. They're calling them UAPs now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
That's it's sort of like, and Pluto's not a planet. But there's technically one where there has been more intimate physical contact been reported on occasion, rarely, but it apparently has happened, I'm told.
Oh yeah. Hey, when it comes to UFOs, there is almost anything goes. I mean, some of the stories I've heard are crazy.
I want to remind everybody, if you do have questions, you can private chat them to either Ceiling Cat or myself, and we will get those answered for you. I know.
Well, somebody brought up
Go
in
ahead.
chat just now, and it's an interesting point. There's absolutely nothing technologically advanced about cows. Yet, for some strange reason, cattle seem to be affected a great deal.
Well, they are delicious.
I don't think they traveled light years for a cheeseburger.
No,
Well,
I
they
think
may not have cheeseburgers anywhere but here. Sometimes people go to the next town over, like that's the only place there's a Wendy's. You know?
no, we know what's going on there. I think it's the genetics. We're drawn to the genetics. It's an easy way to get genetic material, much of which matches humans. And most genes on the planet Earth are identical, largely, no matter what kind of animal you are. And cows particularly have a lot of genomes that are pretty much identical to humans.
And you just brought up a good point, too. They could have been abducting insects, jungle animals for centuries, and we would never know it because they're not domesticated.
Yeah, there's all kinds of weird cryptozoological creatures, too. Make me wonder. But people have seen animals on board UFOs. Alien zoos, essentially. It's not super common. But,
I've always noticed that considering our planet, we take our planet obviously really for granted, which is a shame. But when you watch something like the first real Planet of the Apes movie with Charlton Heston, and they're on what seems to be a desert planet, and then all of a sudden one of the guys says, Captain, life. And there's this tiny little sprig of a plant. And yeah, that's life. So it occurs to me, what if a lot of these other planets don't have as much life forms as we do, including flora and fauna and, like you say, bugs and things?
yeah.
It might be like, whoa, this place is packed.
Yeah, we just don't know, do we? Or at least not officially. But that's certainly been a matter of speculation that perhaps Earth is super vibrant with life, got all kinds of variation, and a number of abductees, or rather I should probably call them experiencers. I don't really like that word, abductees, because some people feel it was a positive experience. But they feel like, this is just a planet with an unusual amount of variation of life, which does draw the ETs in. But such a wide universe, I can't believe we're that unique. I mean, really?
Yeah. Got a point there, yeah. I know this is drive-in related, and that's pretty much an American culture icon. Is there such an equivalent overseas, like in Europe, for example, of the same type of activity for outdoors events?
No, there isn't. Not that I could find. I don't have as many connections, of course, to European research as U.S. But I looked, and finding out these drive-in theater encounters was a real shock for me after having been in this field for decades. I had no idea. And so I really kind of looked deep, and it's definitely part of Americana, part of American culture. There's a number of cases which have occurred in Canada. I think the ETs, and that's what I think we're dealing with here, used drive-in movies as an opportunity to show themselves off to as many people as they could at once, but not too many, because it can cause a panic. And there is one case in China, which I did include in the book because I feel like it's the same phenomena going on here. There was an outdoor movie. It wasn't a drive-in theater, but people walked there. And it was a huge crowd of 3,000 people, actually. And they were watching Beyond the Blue Danube. And suddenly, these two objects appear. They are bright yellow, and they come swooping down right over the audience. This is in 1977 in Fujian County, or Zhangpo County in Fujian, China. And these objects come so low that people can, it's shining the light over the entire audience, and it's so low they can feel the heat from these things. and it causes complete panic. Everyone's just runs for their lives, and more than 300 people were injured, and 2 children were actually trampled to death. It's tragic. So yeah, sometimes I think the ETs miscalculated a little bit and caused panic, because in a good 10% of the cases, that's kind of what happens. People start leaving the theater in droves, not even bothering to detach the little attachable speaker that you had to put on your windshield.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, yeah, that's what I think is going on here. Some uniquely American phenomena for the most part, though.
Now, was there
That's
ever
the first
any?
time. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that's the first time I've heard of heat. I mean, unless it was maybe like more like microwave heat, not heat. If it's been burning people, like, because I always thought like because they're silent, they wouldn't be using like standard fuel as we do. So what would generate the heat unless it was like their electromagnetic fields or something?
Yeah, this actually turns up quite a bit. Turned up in the Westall High School case where a UFO landed right next to Westall High School, and a few kids ran up to it, a number of kids, and they could feel the heat coming off this thing. And sometimes people get close to UFOs and suffer radiation-type sickness. That happened to, what's his name? The guy up in Canada, Falcon Lake, Canada, Stephen Michalik. He got burned by a UFO. It does happen. But it's very curious.
All right, Barbara, I think you had a question.
If I can remember, that was a really good question, Jeff.
Sorry.
Knocked me off. You knocked me off my game here.
Oh,
And then, if they are doing this to get our attention, and they are doing this, the lights might be some sort of hypnotic trigger. Has anybody reported if they've gone through regression to remember more detail, if there was some sort of post-hypnotic suggestion given to any of these experiencers?
No, have no indication of that. Most of these cases involve people who remember exactly what happened and don't feel like there was any missing time. Only a few cases have that weird amnesia, and in those cases, I'm thinking, yeah, there probably was something like this. But in most cases, I think it's a very benign sort of gesture on the ET's part to say, look at us. And like this case, this is probably one of my favorite cases, top 10 for sure. 1966, South Hutch Theater in South Hutchinson, Kansas. Main witness is Pat Mitchell. I talked to him firsthand. He went to a movie with his friend. It was a James Bond movie. They were just 19 years old or so. Parked in the center of the theater, hooked up the speaker, got their popcorn, everything was great. Watching the movie when suddenly this object appears right in their line of sight over the theater, right over the screen. It's getting bigger. It's obviously in the distance, but it's getting close fast. And after a few minutes or so, it approaches the theater itself and parks right in the air, right to the right of the screen, below the level of the screen itself. So this screen is 52 feet high and about 120 feet wide. It's below that level of 52 feet and a good third of the screen. He's estimating maybe 40 feet across. Classic flying saucer, totally silent, colored lights around the rim. It stays there for 5 minutes, goes behind the screen, is out of view for 1 second or two, comes out on the left side, scoots up a little bit, stays there for 5 minutes, then goes and performs one complete circle around the entire theater parking lot, just rounding everyone up, making sure everyone can see, and then starts heading down the road next to the theater, right above the road, at about 20 miles an hour. So no one's watching the movie. James Bond is forgotten. Everyone screeches out of the theater and follows this thing for 6 miles down the road. And it suddenly stops and it pulls off the road and it parks a little bit higher, maybe 300 feet, and stays there for about 5 minutes. Everyone's getting out of their car. The whole road's blocked by a convoy of like 40 cars. And they're all just watching this thing. And finally, it just takes off straight up real fast like a bullet. Boom, gone.
wow.
So what are they doing? What is going on here? I'd like to know.
Well, has anybody, or did any of the beings in the UFOs get out and go into the concession stand to get drinks, hot dogs, or popcorn?
There are some strange people. You have to wonder sometimes. Have you ever been to a drive-in?
Oh yeah, I grew up in them.
But also that brings up the idea of just how big these UFOs are and the occupants involved in it. Because if it's down that low, that must have been a pretty compact craft or only built for a few people, right? Or aliens.
Yeah, in some cases they're maybe 50 feet across, I would say would be about the average. Some are very large motherships. There was that mothership that spit out little ones. Mm-hmm. But sometimes these craft could not hold more than a couple of people. Seriously.
Unless they're transcendentally dimensional.
Yeah, well, that's true. Sometimes people have looked inside a craft, they think it's small, and until they open the door, and then in the inside it's gigantic.
Yep. Wow.
Or it's a drone of some sort, maybe?
I doubt it.
Okay.
Because these really occurred long before drones. And there is one case, by the way, where there were portholes in this thing. This is a theater in Florida. And it came right over the theater, 50 feet above the projection. It says, "Hey, everyone, look, it's a UFO. This is not a hoax. See the UFO."
Uh-oh. Yeah, that can't possibly be a hoax if somebody yells that all of a sudden.
But anyway, it's circling the theater, and everyone sees it. He jumps out of his car, the main witness, and there's portholes, and through the porthole he can see humanoid figures. Can't really tell, if they're different from us, but they're definitely humanoid. It's just a silhouette. And that's a case where the government showed up and shut the movie down and chased everyone off.
Wow.
So the people or the UFOs or both?
It's not clear. This is a third-hand, unsubstantiated report I found on the internet. So
Okay.
I can't verify it, but definitely fits the pattern for these other cases.
Well, everybody assumed that the Greys were tiny little beings, right? 3 feet, maybe.
I'm guessing there's lots of different people doing this. Probably Greys, praying mantis, human-looking. Well, here's one weird case. I don't know quite what to make of. Neither does the witness. She reported to MUFON anonymously, and this is in Bogalusa, Louisiana. And her parents owned a little theater there. And let's see, this was like, I believe, 1960s, late 1960s. And she had come home one evening. The movie was already playing. Her parents were, running the theater. She decided she's going to go out behind the theater and do a little night hunting. This was a pretty rural area. And she heads out with her headlamp and a rifle and keeps the light off. She doesn't want to scare away the critters. And comes over, she's about a quarter mile away from the theater, a few hundred yards, not far. And comes over this rise, and about 100 feet away sees a classic flying saucer. And it's maybe 50 feet off the ground. This is a round disc, metallic. It's got huge windows, 2 feet high, around the entire perimeter. She can see through the windows. There's a yellow light inside, panels, and figures walking around. They look human. She sees mostly just silhouettes, but they appear to be wearing uniforms of some kind. And she immediately assumes they're Air Force people. She's from an Air Force family. The problem is this is a UFO. It's a classic flying saucer. It's totally silent. So she grabs her rifle, points it at them, because it's got a 4-power scope, and she can see this thing, 4 times the size now. And yeah, these are clearly human-looking figures, and some of them are watching the movie. Just sitting there, looking out the windows, watching the movie. She watches them for about 15 minutes and finally decides she's going to play a trick on them, thinking that, these are Air Force guys. She turns on her headlamp and points it in the window. And the effect was immediate. The yellow lights turned bright warning red. The craft powered up, made this huge kind of whining electrical sound, very much like the generators they have at their theater, she said, and rose up and took off, turned on a red light and a green light on one side, and was moving not super fast, but pretty quickly away. She jumps up and makes a long-distance run to the projection booth where her father is, gets there in time to point out the object and says, "Dad, look at this." And she's a college student at the time. And he looks at it and she says, "What do you think that is?" He says, "It looks like a plane." She says, "Well, no, it's not a plane. It was totally silent. It was saucer-shaped. There were people in it. And it was hovering for 15 minutes. And he gave her this kind of sharp look like she was out of her mind. And so she shut up and kept quiet until she was about 70 years old and finally reported this incident. So I don't know if that was military or not. She seems to think it was, but I don't think she has anything that can completely directly point towards this being normal humans, because after all, they're flying a saucer, and if it's an advanced test craft, what the heck are they doing watching a drive-in movie?
Exactly.
It's a weird case. Really weird
Yeah.
case.
Well, also in that they're mimicking aircraft to a certain degree with the red light, green light. Although it's red and white, right? I can't remember the aircraft.
Yeah, no, it's definitely appeared to be mimicking. Yeah, red and green. So I don't know. That's a strange case.
Well, have they gotten more sophisticated over the years with the sightings? You mentioned that sometimes that they were flying all the way around the movie, the drive-in area, and taking off. Do you think that they're starting to get a little bit more advanced with their communications?
No, that's not what we're seeing. The 1950s were kind of the pre-show. In the 1960s, they really started to ramp up and put on displays through the 1960s and 70s. Like there was one theater in Canada. It appeared over the theater so many times, the theater owners took advantage of it and put it in their advertisement. It said, "If you want to see the UFOs, come to the drive-in."
So whatever works.
Right? But it's usually a classic flying saucer. Your kind of 1950s science fiction, B movie flying saucer. Not always. There's dirigible shapes, there's triangle shapes, there's spheres and discs. But generally it's your classic flying saucer with a dome. And I think UFOs, the ETs got a little disappointed when the drive-in movie theaters started to fade out. Because at that time, the sightings definitely decreased in a corresponding manner. And they faded out, but not completely. I still have modern cases. 2015, Tascosa Drive-In in Texas. This object is dipping down over the theater. They tried to film it with their cell phone, but it didn't come out. Another 2017, Fish Creek, Wisconsin. UFO approaches the theater. As soon as it reaches the theater, it stops. Here we go. And it pulls a fantastic right turn maneuver and darts away. It was a quick sighting, not really your classic one, but yeah, there are several modern cases, but really faded out following the 1970s.
And what about their communication with us? Do you think that this is sort of a psychological test? And okay, let's see how they react if we do this.
Yeah, I thought about that, and someone else brought that up. Like perhaps it's emotional testing, because everyone's watching the movie and people are crying, and people are laughing, and they're screaming in fear. And we know from studies of onboard encounters that ETs, particularly Greys, are not particularly emotional, but do show a very strong interest in emotions and emotional testing. So that could be it. I mean, some people think Greys are evil and they feed off fear. Well, that could be why they showed up during a filming of The Exorcist, which did happen, or King Kong or Jurassic Park. I don't know, though. I don't know that they're there to study us. I found a few cases where people were abducted after visiting a drive-in, but the UFO wasn't at the drive-in itself, and no one who saw a UFO at a drive-in said that they were abducted when they got home.
That they remember.
That they remember, right.
Yeah. Oh, there's this wonderful book by Colin Wilson called The Mind Parasites, which kind of brought up a theory that aliens were kind of like space vampires. But I just don't see that as being a plausible explanation, that it's kind of a vampire feeding off of bad energy sort of thing.
Yeah,
Doesn't make a lot of sense.
I don't see that in my own cases. I don't really see that in other cases either. What we do see is emotional testing, but in terms of ETs being sadists and enjoying people's fear, no, we don't see that at all. I'm not saying every case is positive. Some cases are downright scary, and people are screaming in terror, sometimes pain. Not all cases are nice. Some are, some aren't. But many people have, been. It's apparent that ETs don't understand emotion. One guy had very scary experiences, and he had an abduction experience, and the ETs are like, "All right, we're done with you. We did our experiments. Thanks for participating. Aren't you happy? We don't need you anymore." And he's like, "No, I'm mad as hell." And they're like, "Well, what's mad? What's hell?" And he had to explain to them. He literally had to explain to them. And they're like, she replied, the female gray, said, "Oh, yes, we do have trouble understanding emotions. We're sorry for what we did. If you were in our position, you would have done the same thing."
But they definitely have curiosity.
Oh, yeah.
To an extent, from what I understand, when Benny and Barney Hill were being examined, they were in separate rooms, and apparently one of them came running in like, "You're never going to believe this." And they tried pulling at her teeth, and she was like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And it turned out that Barney had dentures. So they thought, "Oh, wow, they don't come fully assembled, I guess," or whatever they thought. And they thought maybe her teeth would pop out as well. But they seemed very excited about it. They were like, "Oh, what a big discovery we just found."
Yeah, one guy told me
they were Nobel Prize for this.
One guy said that they were very interested in his feet for some reason. Turns out he has webbed toes, and that's in a few cases.
Huh. Wow.
Well, is there such a thing as, or do we know about an alien ethics? And obviously we're trying to anthropomorphize them and say, you shouldn't be doing that. It's evil. It's cruel, or whatever. And we really don't understand. Maybe they do have a code of ethics. We just don't quite understand it or can grasp it.
Well, they probably have it posted in their break room.
Well, one would hope. Yeah. Please wash your hands after handling humans.
Exactly.
I wonder about it because apparently there was, if you believe some of the more fringe elements of the whole UFO field, there was a deal made by our government with the Greys.
Truman, right?
Right, yeah, where they, in exchange for technology, they are allowed to abduct a certain amount of people. And I haven't been able, obviously, to get confirmation of this, but this is certainly something that's been widely reported by a number of people. And I wonder about it because we do have large-scale abductions, and kidnapping is a crime in every country, as far as I know. So I wonder about their rationalization for just kidnapping people. And there's been some abductees told that they made pre-life or soul agreements. That's a little bit of a cop-out in my mind, because if that's true, I mean, coming to Earth is a different story, and that people should have the right to break that contract. But perhaps...
That was a previous life. I'm sorry. You'll have to go to a small claims court for this one.
Yeah. And also another weird thing is we must be quarantined. If UFOs are truly as, numerous as I think they are, if people are reporting sightings, 20 or 30, 40 sightings per day just to Newfork and MUFON, and only 1 in 100 people report their sightings. There's, 4,000 sightings going on any given day. So it's a constant activity. It's an infinite universe. There's a parade of UFOs out there, and they're not landing. what's going on? Is this like Star Trek code of non-interference? I think there's something to that, and there are some first-hand cases where ETs have told people that. One guy was abducted in Japan, and ETs told him that directly. They said, oh yeah, we have a deal with the government. We're not allowed to show ourselves or announce our presence, but we are allowed to take a certain number of people.
Wow. I think we're going to go ahead and take our break. Be about 5-6 minutes long, and your mic will be live. Just don't say anything, because you won't hear any of the commercials. You won't hear anything till I come back and start talking again. But the mics will be live. So if we're ready, let's see who takes us out.
Well, it'd be me for the last 10 years or so, but
Right.
you're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your host, Henry Foister, ceiling cat Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's returning guest, Preston Dennett. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.